Hello. Okay, chapter 4 of Morgan Housel's brilliant book, Psychology of Money. Chapter 4 is called Confounding Compounding, and it's got a lot of amazing numbers in it. But the idea is to give you an understanding of the power of compounding using numbers, which is very, very difficult to do because the author says people's people's thinking isn't exponential. People think in a linear fashion. So, for example, if I ask you to figure out 8 plus 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 8, you could do it. It's 10 eights there, so the answer is 80. But if I ask you to figure out 8 times 8 times 8 times 8, by the time you get to 10, you're going to be in the millions, yeah, maybe hundreds of millions. So your head would explode, okay? Compounding. The most important factor, says the author, in building long term wealth is compounding. And it's how something small, given time, can have an enormous impact. All right, just on a kind of concept basis. And to illustrate, he doesn't talk about money. He actually talks about ice ages, which is very interesting. And there was a Siberian scientist and who figured out something, hundreds of years ago. He postulated that because of the way the Earth orbits, occasionally there's a tilt, which means it's getting less sun or more sun, and that is what leads to ice ages over time. So there was a Russian scientist who it's not that long since we've been able to drill into the Earth to check these things, and it was a Russian scientist who did it a lot more recently, who figured out that the Siberian scientists, Blankovich, I think his name was actually right. So there were lots of theories before these two guys about what causes ice ages. Some quite grand theories because ice ages are quite grand events. The whole Earth being frozen under miles of ice is epic. Okay, so what actually happens? First of all, we now know that there have been five ice ages, not just one, but five ice ages. And how do they occur? Well, it's not actually got anything to do with extremely cold temperatures. It's more to do with summers not being warm enough. So what will happen is you have the winter, there's a layer of ice, the summer comes along, the summer's not hot enough to melt that ice. Therefore, there's a little bit more ice on Earth which reflects back to the sun rays, and a little bit more ice is able to settle on the following year. Summer is cold again, more ice, more ice. This happens for a while, and then you get to the point where you've got the whole Earth under miles of snow. So how a small change over time can create drastic change. That's why using the Ice Age as an example, I think was brilliant on the part of the author. So that's Ice Ages. But what about money? It's the psychology of money. Patience seems to be the main virtue here if one's going to be talking about psychology. Morgan talks about Warren Buffett. Uh, Everybody knows who Warren Buffett is, right? World's greatest investor, world's richest investor, etc., worth, at the time the book was written, worth 84 billion, which is a crazy amount of money. I don't think people can actually, conceptualize how much money that is just hearing the numbers. We know it's a big number, but what does that mean? It's incredible. So there are 2,000 books, more than 2,000 books written about Warren Buffett's strategies, styles for investing, etc. Obviously, the idea is that you copy these things and you'll be as rich as Buffett one day. You'll do really, really well. None of those 2,000 books has anything in it to do with what's actually made Warren Buffett so rich, which is the fact that he's been investing consistently and quite well. His average return is 22%, all right, per year, which is pretty good, right? It's not enormous, but it's pretty good. But he's been doing it for 75 years plus, longer than some people live. Now, Warren wasn't a normal kid. He started investing when he was 10. All right, he seriously started investing when he was 10 years old, and by the time he was 30, he'd made his first million. So it took him 20 years to make his first million, and back then a million was worth a lot more. By the time he was 50, he'd accumulated a lot less than 1%. After 40 years of investing, by the time Warren Buffett was 50, he'd accumulated less than 1% of his current wealth. All right. The vast majority of his wealth was made, after he turned 60, probably after he turned 70, because his money kind of went like this, starting from zero. Maybe this is a million. Maybe this is a few million. And then it starts doing this. because he waited. The most important thing about Warren Buffett's trading style, investing style, is patience. 22% returns, great. Over 10 years, you'll do better than the average person. Over 75 years, you're a Warren Buffett. All right. To illustrate this point, the writer also talks, Morgan Housel also talks about Jim Simmons, or Jim Simons as he says it. I'm sure it's Simmons because it's got two M's in it. I don't know, I might be wrong. There's actually a book about Jim Simons, which I'm going to reveal on this channel as well. He's incredible. I mean, this is a guy whose average return since the 90s, I think it is 66% per annum. 3 times as much as Buffett. All right. But he's worth less than Buffett. All right. But had he been trading, he's a trader more than an investor, for as long as Buffett, he'd be worth something, I can't remember the full number because it was probably 5 sentences long, but it starts with 64 quintillion or something insane like that. More money than there probably is on earth, for God's sake. All right. But that's what he'd be worth if he'd been investing for as long as Buffett. His returns are 3 times as good. All right. So the most important thing about investing is, or the most important thing about money, is small changes consistently make a big change over the long term. All right. So for example, let's say if you can manage to save 10% of your income, you do it for 10 years, well, you've got you've saved a year of income. But if you do it over 40 years, boom, all right, and you're going to have been used to spending less anyway. Habits create a lot of change. There's a lot of good books on habits. But this chapter is incredible. The thing about 8 plus 8 plus 8 plus 8 versus 8 times 8 times 8 times 8, you can do the addition, but you can't do the multiplication. It's just incredible. If you can have the patience, there are so many books out there about, or tables out there about the difference in what you'd have if you started saving at a certain rate of interest or investing at a certain rate of return in your 20s versus your 30s versus your 40s. And obviously the earlier you start investing, the more you're going to have. All right. But one thing that the author says, which is brilliant, is there should be a finance book out there which just says, and it should be called Shut Up and Wait. That's what your investment strategy should be. Invest, keep investing, shut up and wait. And over time, you'll be rich. Yeah. If you're investing smartly, you'll be rich. And he says it should just be a 1-page book. And in the book should just be tables of returns over many, many years, which I thought was brilliant. But, we don't like simplicity. Simple things would be really, really easy to follow if the results were instantaneous. Another great book out there, Atomic Habits, and it was actually called The Compound Effect. It wasn't Atomic Habits, it's called The Compound Effect, appropriately enough. And the guy who wrote that one said, if the second after you ate a hamburger, you died of a heart attack, or near fatal heart attack, you didn't die, or the second you smoked a cigarette, you could see your face morphing into like a horrible old face with crinkles and your teeth being yellow and everything. If the effects of small habits were immediate, we'd have no bad habits. But the thing with small habits, like maybe eating too many calories, 100 calories extra a day, 100 calories is nothing, for God's sake, it's 2 cookies, all right? Because it's insidious, because it takes time and you don't notice it because it happens so slowly. By the time you realize it, well, basically with a heart attack scenario, you're dead, aren't you? But the converse of that is it takes time, it's slow, but when it's a good thing like compounding, suddenly, not really suddenly because it took decades, but suddenly you realize you're rich. All right, so compounding. I think that's a brilliant chapter. I hope you enjoyed the explanation.